and welcome to this Shogun spoiler review here on the Outlaw Nation. I'm still caught up in the winds of Toronaga, and we are here to discuss all of it here. A dream of a dream. I am the Outlaw John Rocha, joined as always, as I have been on these reviews for the last 9 weeks, because I think it was the first 2 episodes together. It is my co-host on the Cine-Files and a man who has brought an immeasurable amount of knowledge and entertainment to these reviews because of his James Clavell knowledge and his knowledge of the Shogun book. It is my friend and co-host Steve Morris. Steve, how are you?
I'm very good. I'm a little bit reeling from what we just experienced with our last episode, and in a way where I'm still trying to figure out all of my feelings about it.
About the episode, about the finale, about the finale. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're going to get into all of that here on this spoiler review. Again, this is a spoiler review, so if you have not seen the finale, go back and watch it, then come and hang out with us and let's and enjoy our conversation about this finale. And before I jump into it, I just want to remind you all to please subscribe to the channel down below. You know, the reason we do all the content here is to keep building the Outlaw Nation, and the way you can help us build it is by subscribing down below and hitting that bell button. Of course, leave your comments as we go along as well. Hit a like on the video. That helps. And if you want to share it on your social media to get more people onto the Outlaw Nation and more people enjoying Steve and I's reviews of Shogun and then by connection to the Cine-Files podcast, that would be great. So, Steve, this finale, clearly, as you said, this entire finale felt like they were suffering from the repercussions of episode 9, this episode 10, A Dream of a Dream, basically following everyone's feelings about the death of Mariko. We see Yabushige has clearly lost half of his mind. Blackthorne feels like a completely changed person from what happened here. Toronaga's plans have come to fruition in a way that none of us maybe saw coming from the beginning. Crimson Sky was laid out, performed as he said, but it wasn't an army. It was one woman who went and did that, which was an incredible reveal to have. We see that the Erasmus has been sunk. We find out, we think initially that it's been the Christians and Catholics who sank it. No, it was Toronaga all along, and it was part of this convoluted plan to save Blackthorne's life in order to use him to build fleets for the future war that's coming. And then we go to a flash forward where essentially months down the road, the bloodless war has happened, and Ishido has been deposed, and Toronaga is now Shogun. And all of this begins with a flashback of a flashback, or is this the dream within a dream from him recovering from the explosion? A lot of questions, but overall, Steve, what were your thoughts on this finale that had almost no action, but a lot of philosophical discussions and commentary about looking at the bigger picture as opposed to your own personal wars? Your thoughts?
So I will say, you know, one of the things that you obviously had me on the show about was to discuss the differences between the book and the show. And interestingly enough, I think, while there are many things that are very different from the book in this final episode, including one that I obviously owe our audience a large apology about, which we'll get to, but other than that, the feeling of it actually really does mirror what happens in the book after Mariko's death. And it's probably part of why Shogun, while I do love it, isn't my favorite of the James Clavell books, because it sort of meanders to an end, and then it ends right before the Battle of Sekigahara, and we don't actually go to the battle. We go, you know, so there's sort of like we wrap up some loose ends, and then it just sort of says in that sort of one italicized paragraphs, next month, the two armies meet, and this is what happens, and he becomes Shogun, you know? And so it's like...
Let me stop you there. So what you're saying is, even in the book, there is no war. There's
no war.
There's just a paragraph explaining what happens down the road. Wow. Yep. Okay.
Which is also how King Rat ends, with sort of a poetic paragraph, like it's a thing Clavell likes to do. So in that sense, it does mirror the book. And in that sense, I have sort of a similar kind of unfinished feeling about it, you know, as I did at this episode. So my reaction to it is, there were a couple of scenes that I loved that were really, really moving.
Yeah.
There were several scenes that I went, huh? What? And there definitely was a feeling of sort of, you know, I wanted more. I really was hoping. It was funny, last week when we were talking about episode 9, you said, I mean, obviously we're going to have a huge battle at the end. I can't wait to see that. And I'm going like, well, there isn't one in the book, and I kind of hoped the same thing, that we would get a big, huge battle, but we didn't, you know?
Yeah. I have to say, I felt this when I said this at the end of, and by the way, I recorded a reaction for those of you who may want to see that, and it will be up the next, I think, tomorrow after we drop this review. But I felt this way, that I kind of enjoyed the finale because it felt like a very Eastern finale. And by that, I mean, it's a lot of conversation about philosophy, a lot of exchange about symbolism. We had poetry here, the finishing of a poem. There's symbolism in that, the unearthing of a ship from below that has been destroyed, the putting of ashes and a cross in water to move on, the idea of not killing yourself, or the idea of being willing to risk your life and sacrifice your life in order to stop an injustice that is happening. So there was a lot here that I enjoyed in terms of the back and forth, because 9 was so, and pun intended, explosive. I felt like 10, although I wanted to see the battle, I kind of liked that it kind of moved the way it did, and you could feel Mariko's presence throughout the entire episode. And it occurred to me that this show turned her into the heart of the show, and ironically, it is this episode that made it very clear and solidified it that Mariko was really the star of the show. Not Toronaga, not Blackthorne, not even Yabushige, not Ishido, not Lady Ochiba. It was Mariko. It was everything Mariko did. And ANNA SAWAI's performance, I think, in retrospect, makes this episode work so well, because we as an audience fell in love with her as much as Blackthorne, Buntaro, Toronaga, to a degree, Lady Ochiba, and maybe even Yabushige loved her. And certainly the regents and the council and the people loved her. And so I thought that was a fascinating element to have hanging over this particular episode. And it felt very much like Game of Thrones, in that the 9th episode is always the big episode, and the 10th is always the denouement, the reaction afterwards, the consequences, the fallout, all of that stuff. And that it felt very similar in this episode. But I don't disagree with you. I would have liked more, a little more of the action, a little more of that. But I can see your point there, Steve. I'm sorry, what were you going to say?
Well, I was just going to say, I really agree with what you're saying. And I think if in listing the best things that this show did over the 81 miniseries, over the book, it's her character and the importance of it. And I totally agree. You feel her presence throughout this entire episode. And I think that is among the most powerful thing that they did making this series.
Yeah. Well, let's swing to Toronaga, because really he is in essence, he is the driving force of this episode, because we find out, Steve, throughout this episode, how many of these plans were his plan from the beginning. The Mariko situation is certainly exposed here, but he, in essence, as he tells Yabushige there in a fantastic scene between the two of them, old friends having a final conversation, how he had pulled off Crimson Sky by using a woman instead of an army, which I thought was extremely powerful. And then Yabushige calls him out and says, you know, you bend the wind. What's it like to bend the wind to your will? And he says, I simply study the wind, which is, of course, a very smart thing to say when you've manipulated everything to your benefit. But he does call him out and saying, you know what, you're just like us. You have this something in that secret heart of yours that you want. And so we find out that he also staged the sinking of the ship with Mariko in this plan to save Blackthorne's life with the priest, Father Martin, in tow. And we find out that he has, in essence, has set this all up. And the death of Mariko, which he maybe necessarily didn't plan for, but knew it was a possibility, has turned Lady Ochiba against Ishido. Someone who was adamantly against him has now turned her against Ishido, and essentially we will see in the future will stop the heir's army from joining Ishido, and Ishido will be deposed. So your thoughts on how Toronaga is handled in this episode? We see him with the Falcon and all this stuff. Like, what are your feelings about how he went down throughout this entire episode?
I'm curious to hear you answer that question, because of course my feelings are all mixed up by the book, but I'll say first, it's really hard for me because I like this Toronaga less, I think, because of the way we see some of his manipulation.
Yeah.
In particular, things like, I'm keeping Anjin-san around because he makes me laugh. I really didn't like that line. I was like, dude, you just killed your best friend like in 2 episodes ago. Mariko just died because of it, but you're keeping this guy around because he makes you laugh. Like, I was like, because in the book they have a real friendship, and so he says it's very similar, but I'm keeping him around because I need a friend, you know, which is a very different thing from he makes me laugh. Yeah. The scene with Yabushige, and I'm sure we'll talk more about him and his journey, but it's very different from what's in the book, because what's in the book is all Toronaga's internal monologue. him think he reveals in his thoughts,
Oh.
but he doesn't tell anybody else any of these thoughts. It's just him thinking, where he explains, yes, I burnt the ship, and yes, I knew that Mariko had to do this, and yes, I'm going to burn your next ship if I have to. And like, that's, you hear it, but it's all in his head. It's not a scene with Yabushige. I love the scene with Yabushige. I think it works really well. And I think, his performance in terms of seeing him seeming to be at his low point when he, orders the death of Hiromatsu, and then seeing so sick and frail, and then we come back to him with that falcon that he lets go, and you see just all the pride and the brilliance, and you see who this guy really is. In terms of the great genius, I think they do a great job. And in terms of someone that I like, maybe I like him a little less, but maybe that's what we have to do with great geniuses. I mean, Ieyasu Tokugawa is one of the great leaders of all time, and if you look at guys like Julius Caesar and Napoleon and Tokugawa and Alexander, we don't necessarily feel great about them.
Yeah.
They're different kinds of people, and there's a lot of people that die around people like that because they have their ambitions,
It's a great point. Yeah, I mean, even if you look at something a bit more modern like Churchill, right? Churchill had an incredible run in World War II, arguably saved Britain from Nazi takeover in World War II with some of the courageous decisions, but yet some of the comments that he made that were racist, some of the decisions that he made that were really controversial throughout his career, you can argue that Churchill is one of these great men that we also have to kind of come to terms with some of his actions. I don't know many great people, Steve, that don't have actions that we have to come to terms with in retrospect as the world progresses and as the world changes its opinions on many subjects. So that's a great point. And it's interesting you say that, because I felt that way in this episode. Like, this was an intentional decision. And knowing that Hiroyuki Sanada is an executive producer on this particular series, and made it very clear in early interviews before the first 2 episodes screened that he wanted to be historically accurate. And so maybe his approach to this character was one where he wanted to make him a bit distant, a bit aloof. You could still feel certainly you felt the emotion when he's letting the Falcon go, in essence, and saying, like, have many daughters. I almost feel like he's saying that to the spirit of Mariko, who is gone now. You could sense that, right? So clearly her death has affected him. He didn't necessarily plan for her death, but he knew it was a possibility. And now that it's come to pass, it has affected him, along with Hiramatsu's death. So we see that, but he doesn't break, right? And then we have a moment when him and, what do you think about the moment between him and Anjin and Blackthorne, when they're going back and forth about Blackthorne wanted to kill himself in order to save the town, and he is about to do it. I thought he was going to do it. I was just like, what? And he jumps in, and it's the most emotion and anger we've seen from Toronaga in quite some time. Stops him from doing it, and even puts a pat on his shoulder when he says, I want you, now that you're done with this stuff, go build me a fleet so I can defeat your enemies. So what about that scene, Steve? And of course, the reveal of the spy that's been there the whole time, his samurai spy.
So first of all, I would like to offer a full apology to our audience. I delayed 6 episodes trying not to spoil a thing, just in case they do it at a much later time. Yeah. We finally get to Mariko's death, and I finally revealed Blackthorne's attempted seppuku that happens way earlier in the book, and how it stopped, and how this is the transformative moment for his character. And I felt totally safe that I had not spoiled anything. And 10 minutes into this episode, as soon as you see a head in Jiro, the village that we come back to, I'm like, fuck. They're heading in this direction. They're going to use this thing to get to this dramatic moment with his character. And I can totally see the writer's room where they went, okay, this is the most dramatic moment. Let's have it at the end of the series as a climactic moment for his character, rather than a end of act 1 transformative moment for the character. Right. And so I feel terrible that I did end up kind of spoiling a thing that was going to happen. B, I don't think the setup works nearly as well, because the deaths of the people in the setup of the book, he has to learn Japanese or they're going to kill everybody. All the responsibility is on him. Gotcha. Whereas in this version, it's, they're trying to find out who, did the ship, who burnt the ship. Well, that's not really on him. It's like, that's not exactly his thing. And why is Toronaga killing so many people to find who burnt the ship when he burnt the ship? Right. Like, he knows who did it. It seems sort of manufactured. That being said, and also the difference is that Blackthorne had kind of split with Toronaga and insulted him, and then was trying to make a deal with Yabushige. And so what is exactly his relationship to Toronaga at this moment? And then the moment of him saying, I'm your enemy, I just told you bullshit in order to I feel like there is a kind of a political statement trying to be made, which is certainly justified in saying that the European countries did in fact go around the world selling bullshit to exploit everybody's resources to make lots of money. That's a fact. That's not, and certainly England did that, certainly Spain and Portugal did that. And I feel like this moment of his character is trying to service this idea. But I don't know if you felt like that Blackthorne was full of shit, who was just didn't care about Japan and was just trying to exploit them. And therefore he's finally confessing that. Is that something that you felt in his character up to this point?
No, and it felt a bit incongruent. And so I get what you're getting at if we want to go, knee deep on this. And I hear what you're saying. And you're right. It might have been a modern commentary on a situation that in the book was not addressed, right? And so you see this back and forth with them, because have we had enough time to see Blackthorne's change, right? In order to see that he wants to do this thing, in order to see that he wants to call himself the enemy, in order to take responsibility himself for all the white or European people who went into these different countries, tricked these people, and murdered, killed, raped, looted, set up their own profit centers at the expense of these people in order to succeed. So remember, he's coming from South America, which means he probably did do some pretty nefarious shit down there before he got to Japan. So he was on that ship that did stuff down there, if you follow the course of his ship. So what he's saying in that moment is clearly something that if we had seen shades of it throughout the show, it would have bore more fruit to have him say, finally, like, I'm seeing the error of my ways. I'm seeing the error of my people's ways, and I'm seeing what I've done. Therefore, I am the enemy. I am where it almost felt like in this scene, he is saying, like, kill me for Mariko, like, kill me for her. I don't want anyone to die at my expense anymore. I feel like I share a little bit of the guilt of her death. I don't want anybody else to die for me anymore. I'm tired of it, as opposed to being like, this is something that's been building up to me and building up within me. And I need to say, like, we were terrible. I want to apologize for everybody who has done this to other countries. We must stop. And so, it's an interesting point. It didn't feel like it built up to it naturally. And it was an interesting commentary to shove in there in the middle of this scene.
Well, and this is why I just, after we get past episode 3, I just don't understand Blackthorne's character. I mean, that whole thing, the idea of the guilt of the Europeans, certainly deserved. I mean, we could talk about, we literally could talk for hours and hours and hours of terrible things that Europeans did in Africa, in South America, throughout Asia, India, all of those things. But that's not in Blackthorne's character. I'm not saying that Blackthorne didn't do, maybe he did do things.
Right.
I mean, like but we don't see that. We don't see, like, for instance, I think I mentioned there's a scene where they're trying to get Blackthorne off the galley off of the black ship in the book. And Mariko is translating, and the sailors are just calling the Japanese monkeys and all this terrible, horrible, awful stuff, right? Well, we never see Blackthorne do any behavior like that at all.
No.
We never see him say to Toronaga something and then say to himself in English, I'm totally going to make money off these idiots. Right. Like, we never see that. And if we had seen that, then this idea of, like, he has things to be forgiven for or should die because he's their enemy, that would make sense. But that's why, like, for me, shoehorning this attempted seppuku into this moment, there's just all these different things happening that don't emotionally have resonance. What I do like, which you brought up, is the way that Toronaga stops him and then just elbows him and puts him on the floor, I thought was great. I really like the moment of him saying, hey, go build me a fleet. I think that stuff all works in terms of the resonance, and I have to let go of the book because this isn't the book. This is a movie. This is a series. Right. And so, that doesn't happen. This Blackthorne character attempts seppuku at this moment for this set of reasons, and it has this effect on him. It's a different it's a different moment, I would say.
Yeah, but you still have to look at the but I think you're still right to point out, like, within the show, did they build up to that moment effectively enough? And you can make a case that they didn't. Even though you know at the beginning he says that, and I can see some people already who are probably ready to comment, like, no, in the opening episode he called them savages, and
sure, yes, that's true.
He wanted to do this, and they read the logs and all this kind of stuff. But Blackthorne never radiated that fully, right? At the beginning, yes, you sense that, but then he almost quickly changes that scene with him and Yabushige off the water with the sword and him wanting to kill himself because he's going to drown, and him saving Yabushige. That immediately makes him heroic. So we don't necessarily feel like he's the kind of guy that would have done these things. So he's more ashamed by people finding out about it because he might get caught or he might get found out, as opposed to being ashamed of having done it, right? It's not till he sees maybe his old cohorts there in that alley and what they're up to and what they're doing that he really grasps some of the stuff that he's done in his past or comes face to face. But as you said, in the book, it's a longer scene. So if we'd seen Blackthorne go into that galley or go into that place and have that back and forth with all of his former shipmates and really have what they've done to the people thrown back in his face at a moment when he's feeling superior or feeling good about himself, that could have been something really effective that could have lingered throughout the next couple of episodes, so that when this moment happens, you understand that we've laid the groundwork for him to be able to have that moment of wanting to sacrifice, of calling himself the enemy, of basically wanting to commit seppuku for all the different crimes that Europeans have done to places like Japan and other countries and what have you. So I think there's a very strong point to be made in what you're saying, Steve. And I want to jump into the Blackthorne stuff. Have we anything more on the Toronaga? Anything more here that you want to make sure we hit that we didn't quite talk about from this particular finale?
I do think they definitely deliver on the idea that this guy is a great leader, a leader beyond our ability to even predict or understand, that he's so much smarter and so much farther ahead of everybody.
Yeah.
I think they do a fantastic job establishing that.
And they certainly end with a shot of him standing there almost like he's already Shogun, and then almost like he's part of the land, having the land behind him.
Yeah.
This indomitable thing that will always endure, which I think is an effective finale. So let's talk about Blackthorne before we take a break. Let's talk about his progression. We see the opening here, Steve, of some kind of this. This reminded me of Picard in the what was it called in Generations, when he gets caught up in the Nexus. This is like Picard in the Nexus, having these visions of the future there with his kids. But here we have his grandkids, in essence, and it's a very wealthy house. Is this the future of Blackthorne? Is it not? We see him with the cross, Mariko's cross in his hand. He seems pretty out of it. The grandkids are talking around him. We see the sword, the katanas there, or the samurai swords that are there. So we see all of that, the helmet there. So clearly it feels like it might be the future. But then we come back to him and he's recovering from the death of Mariko. He is clearly messed up. We see that he might be ambushed in the woods. And Father Martin says, yes, we were going to ambush you, but Lady Maria made a deal to get you out of this situation. Heads back, has the conversation with Toronaga, has the beautiful conversation with Lady Fuji about not wanting her to go, about wanting her to stay. And then has this, as I said, moment with Toronaga, and then goes down there and he is pulling the boat out, and Buntaro comes up and they have a nice exchange. And then, of course, earlier Fuji and her on the boat, putting the ashes and putting the cross, which makes it feel like this was just something that was happening because he was knocked out and having visions before he came to. So what do you think about how they handled Blackthorne in this particular episode and the things that happened to him in this episode?
So just with the sort of flash forward dream sequence, I found it really confusing. So your feeling is that it's like a fantasy, because we saw him drop.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, just what you're saying. We see him drop the cross in the water. Therefore, he can't be an old man holding on that cross. Yeah, it was weird. I mean, because I was like, wait, but he has it in the flash forward. I don't understand. Like, it was just weird. Okay. I don't feel like that added anything to this episode other than a little bit of confusion. That's how I felt.
Maybe an allusion to the future of the character that Blackthorne is based on, but not necessarily maybe within the truth of the show. So what have you? Yeah.
But the guy he's based on dies in Japan. You know.
Oh, right.
So like it just threw me. It didn't. And part of it again goes to this, like, well, if Blackthorne is the main character, then this makes sense because he is the central character of the show. Right. And so seeing where he ends up or something like that makes sense. but he's not the main character of this series at all.
No.
And so like it gave, I don't know, that was just sort of weird.
Okay.
I liked him giving the blessing over Mariko after her death. The scene with, I thought that was really good. I think the scene with Alvito is really good. And the moments where he thinks he's going to die. I love his relationship with Fuji. I think they really nailed it. Her coming to sit next to him, explaining that she has to go, and him processing it and understanding and finally saying, I think you'll be a great nun. Totally loved it. Yeah. And my favorite scene in the whole episode is them putting the ashes in the water. Yeah. From the I was very moved. I had tears in my eyes. I think for a relationship that we don't spend a ton of time on, they nail this relationship. It's one of my favorites in the show. I loved it.
I agree with you. There are beautiful scenes between them. And again, whatever's missing from the character is not the work of Cosmo Jarvis. I think he invests in this character as strongly and effectively. And it's in the silences and the nonverbal moments that he is carrying the weight of his work. And I mean that as an actor, like the relationships that he has invested in as an actor with these characters is there in his eyes, is there in his nonverbal expressions, is there in the tears that well up in certain moments throughout this finale. And I thought that was really powerful. The stuff with Fuji, I thought was the as you said, the scene there in the house, but then later in the boat, because she doesn't know what she's going to do with her husband and her son. She doesn't know what to do these ashes. Right. She's supposed to bury the temple, but him saying like, well, let me do this one thing for you. The ashes, they will become part of the sea, which will be larger and endure forever. It'll always be here. So your love and your devotion for your husband and your son, they will always be a part of Japan. They will always be part of this area. So this is a way of keeping them still a part of the soul of the nation, as opposed to just put away in a tomb or in a mausoleum. So I think there's an effective power in that, and her helping him. And I love that line when she said, "Let your hands be the last hands that hold her." I mean, I get emotional hearing that when she said it, and then he lets the cross go. But yeah, but I hear you. Like, it's weird that he's in this Nexus thing at the beginning, and then you're like, well, what does it mean? What is the point of this? And so it is an interesting thing. Was it just to swerve the audience? What was the goal in all of this? Or is it just him just getting hit in the head, so he's having these visions and what have you? But yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
One thing about the scene, the funeral scene on the boat, I wish he had said the prayer for the dead that they say when they commit, I thereby commit you to the deep, because that's a thing he said many, many times on this journey. And I would have loved to have had him say this thing in English that means something to him, and have her not understand what he's saying, but be moved by it anyway. I think that could have been a great moment. I want to talk a little bit about his. So I think there is to use your word, a nexus between the performer, the director, and the editor. Okay. And I do think the three of them got some things wrong. Okay. And I can't pinpoint exactly where it is. It's in the three of them. And in particular, it has to do with how much does Blackthorne know, how much does he understand of what's going on, and how much does he not. And there's a lot of shots of Cosmo Jarvis where there's important things going on, where he does a weird little head sort of bouncy thing. Yeah. And where it goes like, oh, I don't think he has any idea what's going on around him. And I think a big part of that is just which reaction shot do you pick? If you pick if someone says something important and you pick a reaction shot of Blackthorne going and looking, well, then you go, oh, he understood what was just said there. He's concerned. Right. If you pick a shot of him going like that, well, then he doesn't know what's going on. And there were way too many shots of him not knowing what's going on. And this could be, it's funny, it's the weirdest analogy in the world, but I remember when we did Big Lebowski on the Cine-Files years ago, one of the things that Jeff Bridges asked the Coen brothers before every scene was, how much weed has the dude smoked before this scene? And that would help him figure out where he was as he entered the scene. Well, Cosmo Jarvis should have gone up to the director, or the director should have gone up to him and specified exactly what you understand about what's going on, which words you catch, which moments you understand, which things you see and perceive, so that when you cut to him, you get it. He either does understand, or he doesn't understand, or he's trying to figure it out. He's concerned. He's angry. Exactly all of those things. And that's what was not in the character. And it was not in the character for most of the series.
Interesting. Okay. All right. That's a fair point. I wonder if in a rewatch, you might see more connective tissues, or you might be more clear. You might be even more clear on your stance, or even more defined on your stance on that. So yeah, I can absolutely see that. You know, I do feel like I wanted more from Blackthorne in this series, and I've come around on that in the last 3 weeks in our reviews, Steve. Like, I wanted more from him. He seems to be a passerby or someone in the stands to everything that's going on, and would have liked to have seen him invest a bit more as a character, or the writing to have him invest a bit more in what's going on. I do love his scream when he finds Mariko's body. It's a short burst, but the burst is believable. It's not overdone, overextended. It's a guy who's seen death for many, as you said, many times in the sea and in other places probably. So this one exclaim of anger and pain, it fills the void there with the death of Mariko. I thought maybe they'd give her a line or two before she passed away, but clearly like, nope, she's gone. Deal with it. That's how we're going to go along with it. Well, let's take a quick break, Steve. And when we come back, we'll talk about a couple other storylines here in this finale right after this. All right, let's go back into this thing here. Let's have this conversation, Steve, about Yabushige. What about Yabushige? What are your thoughts here on what they did with him, how he progressed throughout this series, and what happened in this particular finale? We see him completely losing his mind from what happened there with Mariko. Then we see him playing. Is he playing stupid? Does he have hearing issues? Is he trying to catch fake catfish so he doesn't have to be Ishido's spy anymore? But then later on the boat, when he's there with Blackthorne, he takes his clothes off and says, "Teach me how to dive. Take me to England. I don't want to be here anymore." Clearly affected. And then when they land at the city there, or the town there, or the village, Omi takes his sword. They go up to Toronaga. He basically admits that he was part of it after he was found out about, with the lady in waiting who had the letter there. Asks to die by different ways, by a dog ripping him to shreds or something. But then Toronaga commands that he do seppuku. He wants Blackthorne to be a second. Toronaga says no. And then he says, "Will you do it?" And Toronaga says yes. And then we cut to later on to him having this interaction with Omi and saying that, "I know you're going to carry the name forward." And then we have the last will, which is a great little moment, which he wrote himself, which he had not done the entire series, which was great. So it's much to the surprise of his second. And then this beautiful scene between him and Toronaga that ends up leading to his quick seppuku and a smile between them before he is beheaded by Toronaga. So what did you think of Yabushige in this particular episode, and how he progressed throughout his story to his finale?
Can I ask your feelings first? Because this is one where I'm definitely infected by different things that are in the book. So let me ask. So I want to ask you,
okay,
is he really going nuts, or is this a ruse in order to get something that he wants?
Well, I do want to say a general overall comment, and that is Tadanobu Asano, who plays Yabushige. The fact that you can't tell, or you don't understand, or you don't know, or you're in a state of like, is it real? Is it not real? That's due to his incredible performance. I mean, he took a guy who you should, by all rights and all accounts, you should not like this guy. He made him extremely charming. Even all the way to the end, you felt sympathy for him because of his pain over the death of Mariko, and him clearly he was asking for forgiveness, and that's what exposed him. That's like the first thing we see of him in this particular finale. And you're like, well, is he losing his mind? He talks about how he confronts Ishido and says, "Hey, I thought she was just going to be captured," and Ishido lies to him about, "Oh yeah, but she resisted, so she had to die." This kind of stuff. And so I think I can't tell. And to be honest with you, I can't tell if it was put on or not, but I wouldn't put it past Yabushige to play this for Ishido, to play this for Blackthorne, so that he'd get out of it, because he seemed pretty with it when Toronaga calls him out. And he was pretty with it when he surrendered the will and that final poem or letter there to Omi. And he was pretty with it in the conversation with Toronaga there on the cliff. So I would say that once again, it was maybe a slight final manipulation to hopefully get him out of the situation, get him to England and away from the punishment. But once he realized the punishment and consequences were coming, he kind of sank into it, settled into it, and made his peace with it. So I even felt sad that he had to die, because I liked his character so much. But that's my feelings on it overall. What about you?
So I love the actor. I loved him from the beginning of this show. I've always loved the character. And I think, we talked about it many times in the Cine-Files, that it exposes this thing of like, we don't like characters in movies because they're good.
Right.
We like characters in movies or shows because they're interesting.
100%.
This guy is super interesting. I was very confused by the crazy act, not because I put it past the character to totally act crazy in order to get what he wants. I just didn't understand what it was going to get him. You know what I mean? It just was like sort of, I don't get, and it is very different from the book. In the book, he doesn't have any regrets. He doesn't say, forgive me to Mariko. He's he's a bad. Wow. The character of Yabu, which is his name in the book, is a fucking bastard. And that's why I like him. There isn't like any soft underbelly to him. He is who he is.
You like him in the book, the way he's constructed.
I love him. Yeah. He's one of my favorite characters. Wow. And this guy's performance of the guy, I adore. So he in some ways he might be the best realization. Mariko too. Yeah. Actually, there are a bunch of them because Toronaga is great too. Yes. So what happens in the book, and it's interesting because you have to do things a different way in order to set up what you want. Right. And so, as I said, Toronaga just internal monologues all the information that he ends up giving to Yabushige at the seppuku scene. So if you want to have that happen, you can't do exactly what's in the book because Toronaga's not at Yabu's seppuku in the book. Omi is his second. And what happens in the book, because we've heard Yabu in the book say over and over again his obsession with death. Oh, maybe I'm going to die today. All right. Oh, maybe I'm going to die tomorrow. What would it be like to die like this? He is obsessed with death. And so he shows up totally calm. There's no acting crazy thing. And he is acting supremely confident until he gets confronted with witnesses that saw him betray everyone and let the ninjas in. And he goes, I guess I'm screwed. And Toronaga says, so I want you to go commit seppuku by tomorrow. And he goes, why don't I do it right now? And he goes, okay. And it goes out and he looks up and he totally blustering and looks up at Omi, gives him his death poem, which I'll tell you in a second, which is not what's in the movie because I love his death poem in the book.
Okay.
And says, hey, make sure you wait for all 3 cuts, which means I'm going to cut across my belly, back, and then up. And only then do you cut my head off, because that's how much of a badass this character is. Wow. His death poem, which I love, is, what are clouds but an excuse for the sky? What is life but an escape from death? Wow. And then the scene cuts away and Omi comes back to Toronaga and says, how did he do? And Omi's like, it was the greatest, bravest seppuku I've ever seen in my life.
Wow.
And so it's like, and what I love about that setup is like, this guy's total bastard. And yet you have to admire him at the end because of his style in the way that he does this thing. But because the show goes, and this is the challenge of screenwriting, is the show goes, I need to get this Toronaga information out, which means he has to say it to somebody. Right. And the brilliant conclusion they come to, the only person he can say all of his ambitions to is the guy that's about to die. And I think that is brilliant. And that means you can't have this other stuff.
Yeah. It's like a reverse James Bond situation, Steve, where the villain gives the information to Bond, but Bond lives this time for sure. He's going to die. Yabushige.
Yeah. So it's different, but I did like what was in the show.
Yeah, I liked it too. And the more I think about your question about whether he played it crazy or not, I don't know if we need to land on a definitive thing because it's trauma. It's PTSD. Who knows what he was seeing? Who knows how it affected him initially? And maybe he got level-headed as he got closer to where they would get to the village, to Izu there, and figured it and just kind of got finally leveled out, right? And was able to communicate. Because we even see Blackthorne like lost in moments of introspection, rather, lost in moments of reflecting back on things. So he's clearly recovering from the trauma of the death of Mariko as well. So maybe the initial stuff is accurate because he's got PTSD or trauma, and maybe it's because he doesn't want to be in service of Ishido anymore. And so playing the crazy person means Ishido won't make him the spy because he can't trust him. So maybe that's his intention if you were going to go that route and try to explain why he would do that. But it wouldn't explain why he would do that to Blackthorne on the ship, because if you're trying to get him to take you to England, being crazy is not how you get Blackthorne to take you to England. But I did love the change in the relationship where it is Yabushige who is like trying to give himself over to Blackthorne to take him to that land of what do they call them, savages or whatever he called them, barbarians, that land of barbarians there in England. So but yeah, and maybe they changed Yabushige's character because they wanted a little comic relief throughout in certain moments, even though I wouldn't say he was like a jokester, but certainly having those moments there. I wonder if maybe that was on purpose because Yabu, as you said, is such a hardcore guy. Maybe they felt it wasn't that. And maybe it's a Lady Macbeth moment too, where him going for the catfish, out damn spot. Maybe there's a feeling of guilt with all of that as well.
I wish the thing that makes the most sense to me, but it doesn't make sense with the stuff with Blackthorne on the galley is, oh crap, I just realized that I sided with the wrong side by betraying Mariko and going to Ishido. I think Toronaga does have a plan. I got to get back to his side.
Yeah.
And I think that makes sense, but it doesn't quite make sense with all the behavior.
Yeah. Good point. Because he could have been like, well, I see this is the smarter move. Yabushige is like Tessio in The Godfather. He's always going to make the smarter move, but eventually, just like Tessio, he ends up dead by the end of the movie. Spoiler for a movie that's that many decades old. What are your feelings on Father Martin? I mean, I said this in my reaction that I felt like one of the drawbacks from the show is that I wanted more of him throughout the show, more of his presence, more interactions, more scenes. I don't know if there are more scenes in the book with him, but I liked what we got even in this finale, the back and forth with him and Blackthorne, their shared love of Mariko being the thing that connects them, and him saying like, oh, maybe one day we'll be able to be friends in the future. But Blackthorne calling him out, saying like, oh yeah, right. All these isms of religion will somehow be able to be, put down so we can all unite. And so it's a bit of a slight commentary on tribalism, even within a religious construct that I thought was really interesting. But at the end, but his final scene there, saying that it was Lady Maria who essentially bargained for Blackthorne's life, and he is, by doing what he's done to allow Blackthorne to leave, he has ended his service to Lady Mariko and honored her service to the Catholic Church. So did you like him in this? And do you feel like I feel that we didn't get enough of him in the series?
The answer is yes to both questions. I liked him throughout the whole series. And yes, I didn't feel like we got enough. I think, it's interesting. I think the Game of Thrones comparison makes a lot of sense, which is interesting for a novel that predates Game of Thrones by, 20 years.
Right.
But like, I think in Game of Thrones, there is a sense that there are a couple of good people and there are a bunch of bad people. And we're hoping that the good people end up on top. But there isn't so much a debate of philosophies, I would say, in Game of Thrones. Like, you don't go this, that the Starks care about this and these people care about this. Whereas in Shogun, there is a debate of philosophies. There is definitely, when you hear Blackthorne's internal thoughts, he thinks that what England has discovered in terms of trade and business, and this is a total James Clavell thing, because James Clavell, by the way, he's a big fan of Ayn Rand. Yeah. So, so he is very much into capitalism and business, and Blackthorne's agenda is everybody does better with trade. That's his agenda. Whereas if you're in Father Alvito's head, he loves the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
And loves the Jesuits and believes they're bringing, not only are they bringing the word of God, which will save millions of souls, but they're also bringing the wisdom of the Jesuits in education and all of those things. When you meet the Franciscan monk, he cares about the Franciscan things. The Japanese care about each of their things and their culture. And so you're feeling that debate of which of these cultures is right, or which is right about which things, and what are the blind spots of each of these cultures as you go, because that's what's happening within the book. But I don't think that's happening as much within this show because we don't have time to engage on those issues. We don't. So I do think there was more to be dug into, but I also go like, you got 10 hours. This is, that would be a real hard digression to get into the politics of the Catholic Church and the Jesuit movement and different people with it. Because the other thing is, within all of these, there are good guys and bad guys. So the father visitor or whatever, his boss is a total jerk, right? So and Alvito knows that he's not a good guy and still trying to do good in how he sees what doing good is in Japan.
Yeah, he never radiated an evil character. No. Right, it was his boss who was, and that ship's captain, the black ship's captain as well. So two more things. Let me ask you about Lady Ochiba's situation here. Did you like the scenes of her with the air finishing off Mariko's poem and the symbolism of that, and then her interactions there with the Council of Regents and Ishido? And if you want to throw in Ishido, what are your thoughts on all of the stuff that went down here in the finale? Did you like the way it laid itself out in the way that Ishido, in essence, gets outflanked by Toronaga, even though he's the one at that meeting with the Regents where he says, like, Toronaga's trying to divide us. I'm very clear about what's happening. I know what's happening here. We're going to war. It seems like a futile attempt to try to stop this. And then the earthquake happens, which makes them all start to question whether they should go to war. Because as we find out later from Yabushige, the Taiko changed his minds after about going to war in his past after an earthquake happened. So what did you think of how Lady Ochiba and the council here and Ishido were laid out here in this finale?
So first of all, every time you and I are trying to make serious decisions about the Cine-Files and an earthquake hits, I always change my mind.
It's true.
When the gods say something about your podcast, you have to listen. That's the first thing. I think this is so much better done in the show than in the book in terms of Ochiba, because when you're in that scene with the council, and this is exactly what I mean about the director, the actor, and the editor.
Okay.
All you're doing is cutting to her reaction shots.
Yes.
And her reaction shots are telling you she's not with this.
Yeah.
She is not feeling good about this. She's realizing she backed the wrong horse. She's realizing that the only thing the only thing Ishido really has is her son's banners.
Right.
And if he doesn't have that, he's going to lose. Right. And that she is essentially backed the wrong horse. And I think all of that storytelling is done really, really well, culminating, of course, with her finishing the poem with her son and our realization of like, oh, this is the final nail in Ishido's coffin. I think that's all done really, really well.
Okay. I agree. I think it's done really well. And I thought the performance was, because I thought initially, of course, Steve, that I thought, well, she was going to come in and all hell was going to break loose and she was going to be defiant all the way to the end. But she's a political animal, and clearly you can see that. And initially you may have thought that, but as we see the Mariko influence, once again, the Mariko influence here affecting her, she's the one that says, when one of the lords is, I think the lord with leprosy says, like, she deserves a Christian burial. Ishido initially goes, no, you know what? She chose her path and we'll get to it, but not right now. And she's the one that says, Ochiba who says, like, no, she will get all what she deserves, the respectful burial that she deserves. So in essence, countering him, even though she had said in the last episode when she flipped that fan open that, don't seek my counsel, or I'm just giving my opinion. I'm not trying to influence anybody. So very clearly the way she played it. Now, what about the final scene here with Buntaro and Blackthorne? What did you think of that back and forth and nonverbal back and forth between them? And the moment, was that once again yet another aspect of the love of Mariko, bringing these two men who would never probably normally be friends in life, finding some kind of common ground?
I think I liked it. It was a little odd. There was certainly a moment. I think the actor playing Buntaro looked wrecked. He did a great job.
Yeah.
The whole series. And I think that moment, I would have extended that moment of tension where they're just looking at each other even more, because it could be that Buntaro's just going to cut his head off right then. But I actually think it worked really well, and symbolically having him help raise the ship. That's how you operate in film a lot, is you operate in symbols. Is, you don't, because it isn't in general great to have people just express, hey, dude, I was wrong about you. That's all right, man. We both love the same woman. I guess, we can be friends now. Like, that would be a terrible, terrible scene.
Dude, don't talk like that, first of all.
You don't, people expressing exactly how they feel at important moments of their life is generally not dramatic and not good screenwriting. Good screenwriting is to operate in symbols. Right. And this symbol of them working together at this moment, I think worked pretty well. And I think the addition of the samurai who'd been a spy who speaks Portuguese, although in our show he speaks English, I think that gives us a sense going forward, Blackthorne's going to be okay because he has another ally who can translate, and that's going to help him stay connected to the world. I think all that's handled pretty well.
Yeah, a samurai ally, which is a good ally to have. And you're right, the symbolism of unearthing the ship that was initially coming to the shores to essentially pillage Japan is now going to be...
they were coming to the shore to trade. They were not coming to the shore to pillage. Okay. No, they were. That is
all right. If you say so. I don't trust any Europeans coming to foreign shores to do anything but pillage.
One of the things, and this is big in the book, is that when the Portuguese showed up and the Spanish showed up, they thought they were going to do what they'd done everywhere else, which is pillage, which is take over the countries, install, rulers, and then take all of their resources. Right. And they realized they couldn't do that in Japan. There was just no way they could do that, which is why we have the situation that they have. And again, it's the book, but all Blackthorne wants to do is trade. That's all he talks about,
Fair enough.
Hey, I'll knock down Europeans for what they did other countries as much as you will.
Yeah.
I'm just telling you what's in this story.
I'm just saying the logs were telling a different story, and he didn't want that stuff to come out. So clearly, they have pillaged in the past on that ship. So I was just basically saying that the symbolism of the Erasmus being brought back out of the water and repurposed as something positive to help keep peace there in Japan, instead of being used to trade and maybe hoodwink the Japanese, I thought was a nice bit of symbolism as well. Overall, let's wrap up our discussion, because we're at 50 minutes already, which is pretty surprising, but that's how enjoyable this conversation is and this show has been. Steve, your overall thoughts here, and if there's anything more you need to add or you want to add from the finale, your overall thoughts on this season of Shogun, and do you think we might have a season 2? Your thoughts?
That's my first overall thought, is if you had asked me when we started, I would say this is going to be a mini series just like it was back in the early 80s. The book ends exactly the way this series ended. And so therefore that is the end. And my experience at the end of this is I want season 2. Okay, I feel like we have plenty of great characters still around. We have lots of conflict. We haven't gotten to the Battle of Sekigahara yet. And Sekigahara is like, there's still tons of drama in the early 1600s in Japan. And obviously, but this character, the real life character that Blackthorne is based on, lived until 1620 in Japan and did a whole bunch of stuff. And so I think, first of all, my first thought is, I would like season 2. I think it's a great idea. And I think the show has been so successful. I am sure that meeting is happening right now in some office somewhere about how are they going to get a season 2. My biggest criticism of the show, as everyone watching this knows and is sick of hearing, is the character of Blackthorne. I'm not going to go back into it again. But my admiration for the show is the other side, which is that what they really did was flesh out and focus on all of these characters in medieval Japan, and really showed how interesting, important, Machiavellian, brilliant, thoughtful, courageous, and filled with a sense of duty and within this culture. And it was really profound. It's beautifully shot. It's beautifully made. I think while I have objections to things that mostly come from my knowledge of the book, had I not read the book, I would have absolutely loved this thing top to bottom. And I probably would have, if this had come out, like I read Shogun when I was 16 or something. Well, if this had come out when I was 16, I would have been obsessed with Japan in the same way I became obsessed with Japan from reading this book and watching the miniseries back in the 80s. So I really, really enjoyed doing this.
Yeah. And I appreciate you coming along on this trip, Steve. I didn't know where it was going to take us, where it was going to lead, or if we would even do more reviews after the first 2. But this show was so effective. It was so excellent that I was very happy to come back every week to have this conversation with you, because I always enjoy hearing your points of views on things. You're very knowledgeable and learned at points of views there from both the James Clavell book and also your ability to analyze the stuff, which is why we do the Cine-Files. Has been such a wonderful show for the last few years. And I really enjoyed talking about this with you. And I enjoyed this season. I loved this season. I am a Japanophile. I love Japan, love everything about the samurai, love everything about feudal Japan. I try to watch as much as I can about that stuff. There's a great Netflix series, The Age of Samurai, that was on, that I rewatched again a couple of weeks ago on a Saturday, just to kind of get back into that mood because of Shogun. And the reason I love the Akira Kurosawa films, I love these other samurai films that have come through that Toshiro Mifune was a part of, and other people were a part of. I just love that time. I love the nobility of that time. I love the era. To have a Game of Thrones type story being told within that era, I thought, and as Steve correctly pointed out, Game of Thrones is after James Clavell's Shogun, so maybe Game of Thrones influenced by James Clavell's Shogun. But either way, the fact that we had that energy coming through a story like this, I thought was such a fantastic thing to experience week to week. Incredible performances, great direction. Frederick Io Toye directed this one. Phenomenal writing. Megan Huang wrote this one, and having all of that throughout. The cinematography, the opening theme, the opening montage, all this stuff throughout, and the way they made me care about these characters and gave me a bloodless finale that I was 100% riveted by all the way to the end, I think speaks volumes of the expertise that was involved in creating this show. And Anna Sawai deserves an incredible amount of credit for creating a character so resonant that she hung over everything in that finale and wasn't even in it beyond the opening moment and flashback, an occasional flashback there in montage. I thought it was incredible what was done here. And yes, like you, I want to see a season 2. There's so much more to explore here, and especially because Toronaga says maybe someday I'll tell Blackthorne the truth. That's a dramatic moment right there from a future episode that you can explore. Was I manipulated by Toronaga? Have I been manipulated the whole time? How do I feel about that? So there's something to explore there. Certainly tension that still will erupt in the back and forth and all these great characters and actors. So 100%, I would love it to be back. I am nervous because once the Game of Thrones, Benioff and Weiss people went off the novels, that last season and a half was not that great. So I wonder if they can create a season that is on the level of James Clavell's source novel there for Shogun and be every bit as effective as season 1 was. But either way, I'd be willing to find out one way or another. So I hope at some point down the road they do that. So all right, well, there you go. That's our spoiler review for the finale of Shogun. Thanks to everybody who has joined us every week for these reviews. Even if you're joining us for the first time, go back and rewatch all our reviews of the previous episodes. A lot of fun discussing this stuff for sure. Steve, thanks again for joining me on this trip, and please let people know where they can find you and find our wonderful podcast.
Well, they can find me at SR Morris on Twitter, and the Cine-Files, CINE-FILES podcast has been breaking down great films for, almost 9 years.
9 years.
Yeah. That's just crazy that we've been doing this that long. And we just finished our season of Scorsese where we did Goodfellas, Raging Bull, and The Last Temptation of Christ. This coming week, we're doing a live show on baseball movies. That'll be on the Cine-Files YouTube channel. And next after that, we're jumping into what is in my top 3 Marvel movies, which is Captain America, the Winter Soldier. So lots of exciting things going on the Cine-Files.
Yeah, that might be my favorite MCU movie. So yeah, I can't wait to dive into that and have some fun discussing that with you as well, Steve. As for me, you can follow me at The Rocha Says on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, The Outlaw Nation on Twitch. Please remember to subscribe to the channel. We're marching towards 50,000 subscribers. Help us get there as quickly as possible. Hit that subscribe button, hit that bell button. So as you know, we're dropping all the content we do here on the Outlaw Nation, the shows, the reviews, the reactions, all of it is here for you all. And if you want to join the Patreon to financially support us and everything we're doing here on the Outlaw Nation channel, head on over to patreon.com/John Rocha Says. All right, one last thank you to everyone who's joined us every week. Hope you enjoyed this finale spoiler review. Let us know your comments down below. Hit a like on this video, and we'll talk to you next time with another brand new review or reaction video here on the Outlaw Nation. Take care. Peace until then.